All right, let's get started. Grab your digital notebooks, settle in, and welcome to today's Explainer lecture. We're diving into a genuinely fascinating slice of history today. One that traces the surprising origins of two of the world's most spoken languages, Hindi and Urdu. If you think you already know how these massive linguistic pillars of the modern world were formalized, well, prepare to have your assumptions completely challenged.
So, pop quiz right off the bat. Who is the father of modern Hindi and Urdu? Think about it for a second. If I asked you to guess the architect who formally standardized these beautiful, historically rich languages, you might naturally picture a revered local scholar, an ancient poet, or maybe a renowned South Asian linguist. But I can almost guarantee you probably wouldn't guess a guy named John from Scotland.
Well, believe it or not, that is exactly the answer. The man widely regarded by history as the father of modern Hindi and Urdu is Dr. John Borthwick Gilchrist, a Scottish doctor. It totally shatters your preconceptions right out of the gate, doesn't it? Okay, let's dive into this and uncover exactly how a British medical professional became such a central figure in South Asian linguistic history.
Here is the syllabus for today's masterclass. We'll be tracing this historical timeline step by step. We'll start with the surprising father. Look at his pivot from surgeon turned scholar, examine his work at Fort William College, break down the great language divide, and finally, wrap up with a lasting controversy.
All right, let's open the first chapter of our historical biography, Section 1, The Surprising Father.
Our story begins way back in the year 1759. This marks the birth of John Borthwick Gilchrist in Scotland. At this point in time, geographically and culturally, he is literally worlds away from the Indian subcontinent and the languages he would eventually end up shaping. Moving right along to Section 2, Surgeon turned Scholar, where we'll look at his massive pivot from medicine to words.
This guy's life followed a pretty wild trajectory. So, in 1782, Gilchrist arrives in India. But he doesn't arrive as a linguist or teacher. He's actually a surgeon for the East India Company. But then, his focus completely shifts. Between 1785 and 1790, instead of just practicing medicine, he essentially dedicates himself entirely to studying and teaching the local language. By 1796, this former surgeon has totally transformed into an eager scholar, publishing a major academic work, a grammar of the Hindustani language.
Now, let's just hit pause on the timeline for a quick second so we're all on the same page. What exactly was he studying? Hindustani. This was the everyday, common spoken language of North India during this era. It was the shared medium of communication across a vast, incredibly diverse region. This is basically the raw foundation Gilchrist was working with.
Okay, jumping into our next section, Section 3, Fort William College and a major institutional shift.
The year 1800 is an absolute landmark. Fort William College gets established in Calcutta. Because of his intense study in that 1796 grammar book we mentioned, Gilchrist isn't just participating, he's actually appointed head of the Hindustani department at this newly established college. This is a highly prestigious academic role, giving him immense influence. And he doesn't waste any time. Just 2 years later, in 1802, he codifies the language even further by publishing a massive foundational text, a dictionary, English Hindustani.
Which brings us to the real crux of our lecture, Section 4, The Great Language Divide. This was the monumental linguistic split that took place under his watch in the early 1800s. Before this, remember, we had Hindustani as the common spoken tongue, but Gilchrist standardizes Hindustani into two distinct literary forms. On one side, we have Hindi, utilizing the Devanagari script and pulling heavily from a Sanskrit-based vocabulary. On the other side, we have Urdu, utilizing a Perso-Arabic script with a Persian-Arabic vocabulary. So we've got one spoken language suddenly channeled into two very distinct written and literary tracks.
I really want to emphasize this exact historical phrasing here. He standardized Hindustani into two literary forms. The crucial takeaway? This wasn't just some casual observation of how people happened to be talking. It was a top-down academic formalization. Gilchrist and his department actively systematized the scripts and the vocabularies. This active standardizing was quite literally the turning point in the history of these languages.
All right, let's shift into the final part of our lecture, Section 5, A Lasting Controversy, to examine the massive ripple effects of this academic decision.
We absolutely cannot overstate the cultural consequences of this split. By separating the scripts and vocabularies, Gilchrist's work laid the absolute foundation for the entirely separate development of Hindi and Urdu moving forward. But it didn't stop at words on a page. This separation forged very distinct linguistic identities among the people speaking them.
Ultimately, this foundational split contributed directly to the later Hindi-Urdu language controversy. The academic boundaries drawn up in a classroom in the early 1800s became deeply rooted cultural and political boundaries later on.
So, when we zoom out and look back at the entire timeline, from a Scottish surgeon arriving in 1782 to the head of a university department standardizing two distinct literary forms, the whole picture comes into focus. Because of his direct, hands-on role in standardizing and formally separating these languages, Dr. John Berthwaite Gilchrist undeniably earned his pretty massive historical title, the father of modern Hindi and Urdu.
As we wrap up today's explainer lecture, I want to leave you with a sort of final exam question to ponder, something to chew on when you close your notebooks. How profoundly does the academic standardization of a language shape the very identity of the people who speak it? We've just seen how a Scottish surgeon's academic choices in Calcutta rippled through centuries to forge distinct identities for millions and millions of people. It's an incredible reminder of the power of language, don't you think? Thanks for joining me for this masterclass. Keep asking those big questions, and I will see you in the next explainer.